Zithos 9, the asteroid mining colony with all the charm of a rusted tin can floating in a cosmic latrine, was having one of those days. You know the type. Loud, chaotic, and peppered with curses in 5 different languages, mostly directed at the universe, and its uncanny knack for screwing over humanity at the least opportune moments. Chief Engineer Marla Keene, or the poor bastard in charge, as her crew affectionately called her, was knee-deep in the latest crisis. A mining drone had gone rogue, decided to play hide and seek with a vein of particularly cranky uranium, and now the whole place smelled like burnt toast and impending doom. "We're gonna need more than duct tape and prayer this time," Marla muttered, her voice barely audible over the cacophony. "What was that, boss?" asked Jax, her ever-optimistic assistant, who seemed to think every disaster was just the universe's way of keeping things interesting. "I said, we're about to have an explosion big enough to send us all to whatever afterlife you believe in," she replied with a smirk. Jax grinned, unfazed. "Well, I always wanted to die in space. Better than getting run over by a hover car back on Earth. You set your goals low enough, kid, and you might just achieve them," Marla shot back, wiping grease off her hands onto her already stained coveralls. The drone's last known location flickered on the console like a bad omen. "You're closer to it than any of us, Marla," the PA squawked, the voice of Colonel Darman, the colony's overseer and resident buzzkill. Marla rolled her eyes. "Yeah, because that's what I signed up for, babysitting homicidal machinery. Just do your job and we won't have to test the colony's life insurance policy." "Great pep talk, Colonel." "Really inspiring," Marla replied, flipping the switch to mute as she headed into the belly of the beast. Deep in the mines, with walls that seemed to close in faster than her patience, Marla found the drone perched precariously on a chunk of asteroid, its mechanical limbs twitching like an over-caffeinated spider. "All right, you little bastard," she said, turning tools into weapons of negotiation. "Let's see if your maker left a reset button on this thing." Jax's voice crackled over the comms. "Careful, Marla. Remember, it's not just the drone. There's talk of something weird down there." "Define weird," Marla muttered, not really in the mood for surprises that didn't involve cold beer. "Some kind of artifact. Maybe alien." Marla paused, her hand hovering over the drone's access panel. "Alien, huh? Just what we need. Unpaid overtime with a side of first contact." With a deft flick, she deactivated the drone, which let out a whimper and slumped like a disgruntled retiree. But just as she was about to breathe a sigh of relief, her boot knocked against something hard. Something that definitely wasn't rock. "Jax, get your ass down here. I think our luck's taken a turn for the bizarre." The artifact was everything you'd expect from something mysterious and potentially universe-altering, ominously glowing, humming slightly, and absolutely refusing to fit in with the rest of the mining debris. "What do you make of it, boss?" Jax asked, arriving with the enthusiasm of an eager puppy. Marla scratched her chin. "Looks like something that could get us shot if we try to sell it, or worshipped if we play it right. Or both," Jax offered cheerfully. "Yeah, because that's just what I need," Marla said. "A fan club of trigger-happy aliens." Back on the surface, Colonel Darman was less than thrilled with the discovery. "I don't like unexpected surprises, Marla." "That's why you lead a mining colony and not a traveling circus," Marla replied, arms crossed, eyes daring him to challenge her. "We need to be cautious about this. It could bring unwanted attention." Marla snorted. "Colonel, unless the artifact can sing and dance, most folks out here couldn't care less. Except maybe those aliens who think we're trespassing." The colonel sighed, a sound that spoke of bureaucratic headaches and existential dread. "Just make sure it doesn't blow us all to kingdom come." "Inspiring as always," Marla said, heading back to the artifact. "Come on, Jax. Let's see what kind of trouble we can stir up with this thing." With the crew rubbernecking like tourists at a car crash, Marla and Jax hauled the artifact into the lab, where the colony's resident science officer, Dr. Farah, waited with all the anticipation of a kid on their birthday. A birthday that involved potentially lethal presents. Fascinating, Dr. Farah said, eyes aglow with academic greed. Yeah, it's a marvel, Marla said, waving dismissively. Now figure out what it is before it bites us in the ass. Farah nodded, fingers already dancing over the artifact with the precision of a concert pianist. Preliminary scans suggest it's a power source, something beyond our current understanding. Great, Marla said dryly. Just what we need. An energy crisis solved by a cosmic mystery box. Jax leaned closer. Maybe it's a sign, boss. A sign of what? That the universe has a twisted sense of humor. Or that we're meant for something bigger, Jax suggested, eyes wide with wonder. Kid, the only thing bigger we're meant for is trouble, Marla replied, though a part of her couldn't help but wonder if the kid might be onto something. As Dr. Farah continued her examination, the lab screens filled with incomprehensible data, charts, and graphs, science's version of a medieval grimoire. The artifact pulsed with an unsettling rhythm like it was breathing, waiting, deciding. Marla, Farah finally said, her voice tinged with excitement and a dash of panic. It's sending out a signal. A signal, Marla echoed. To who? To anyone listening, Farah replied, her fingers a blur on the console. Well, let's hope whoever picks up isn't looking for a fight, Marla muttered. Jax's face lit up with a mixture of fear and hope. What if they're friendly? Marla laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. Friendly? Kid, the universe doesn't do friendly. It does opportunistic and vengeful. Farah's eyes widened. Incoming transmission. The comms crackled to life, a voice slithering through the static, speaking in tones that hinted at both malice and curiosity. Humans, the voice drawled, dripping with disdain like oil from a broken engine. You have found something that belongs to us. Marla felt a headache forming, one that no amount of painkillers would touch. Who are you? We are the Nyxarians, the voice replied, full of the kind of smug satisfaction usually reserved for victors in a long-drawn war. You have something of ours. Return it or face the consequences. Fantastic, Marla said, rubbing her temples. Just when I thought the day couldn't get any worse, we get threatened by space assholes. What do we do, boss? Jax asked, his earlier enthusiasm dimmed by the reality of their situation. We do what we always do, Marla said, a grin tugging at her lips. We improvise, we fight, and maybe, if the stars align, we come out on top. The transmission ended, leaving the room in a charged silence that buzzed with potential violence and the thrilling certainty of impending chaos. Marla looked at her team, ragtag and resilient, and felt a surge of grim determination. All right, folks, she called, clapping her hands together with the energy of a general rallying her troops. Time to show these Nyxarians what humans are made of. As plans were hastily drawn and weapons readied, Marla couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. Stuck on a rock in the middle of nowhere, about to face alien forces with little more than grit and a defunct mining drone. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but hell, it was the life she had. Here's to living dangerously, she said, lifting a glass of the colony's finest rotgut. And to making sure the universe never forgets we're here. The team echoed her toast, their voices a chorus of defiance and camaraderie, ready to face whatever the cosmos threw their way. The stale air of Zithos 9 felt like a cloying reminder that if one was going to die here, it was going to be in a recycled tin surrounded by rust and radiation. Marla Keen, the poor bastard in charge, was halfway through her second cup of sludge, Coffee's less reputable cousin, when the colony's radar system blipped an unwelcome greeting. The Nyxarians had arrived and they weren't here for a friendly potluck. Boss, I think our guests have RSVP'd, Jax, her ever-optimistic assistant, reported with a grin fit for someone who still believed in happy endings. Foolish kid. Of course they did. 'Cause a day without existential threats is like a day without breakfast. Unbearable, Marla replied, tossing her mug aside as if accepting the inevitable. The comms crackled to life again, with Colonel Darman's voice sounding as enthusiastic as a man forced to eat glass. Marla, alien ships are orbiting. I don't care if you have to charm, threaten, or beg, but keep them from reducing us to space dust." "Thanks for the pep talk, Colonel. I feel inspired already," Marla quipped, heading towards the control room where chaos awaited. As she walked in, the room buzzed like a nest of irritated bees. Screens flashed red warnings, technicians panicked like their pants were on fire, and above it all the Nyxarian ships hovered menacingly on the display, sleek and ominous. "Right, everyone listen up," Marla shouted, commanding the room's immediate attention. "We're about to have an intergalactic standoff. Any volunteers for diplomacy?" Jax raised his hand, a picture of misguided eagerness. "I can bake them a welcome cake." "Sure, if by cake you mean a bomb. Otherwise, I suggest we focus on not getting vaporized," Marla shot back, scanning the room for someone with half a brain left. Enter Dex Harwood, the colony's resourceful miner who could turn a pile of scrap into a semi-functional death trap. He strolled up with the confidence of someone who'd seen too much to be worried about an impending apocalypse. "Got an idea or two, Marla," Dex said, giving a sly grin under his salt and pepper beard. "We could play nice or play hardball with those Nyxarians." Marla folded her arms, weighing options like a gambler on a losing streak. "Playing nice hasn't exactly been our strong suit. They want the artifact," Dex continued, casting a glance at the glowing menace that started this whole mess. "And they ain't gonna ask twice." "Then we make sure they don't get it," Marla decided. "But let's keep Plan B, blowing them out of the sky, on the table." Dex nodded. "I'll rig the mining drones as a makeshift defense. They won't expect our little tin can to bite back." "Sounds like a date," Marla said. "You and Jax get on it. I've got to see if we can stall these alien bastards long enough for a miracle." Jax saluted with a grin. "On it, boss. Let's turn this place into the deadliest asteroid field they've ever seen." As Dex and Jax left, Marla turned her attention to the comms, the Nyxarian presence a looming shadow that demanded immediate handling. She flicked the switch, opening a channel to their unwelcome visitors. "This is Marla Keene, Chief Engineer." "What do you want?" The comms hissed with static before the Nyxarian spokesperson responded, their voice as slippery as oil on a hot skillet. "We require the artifact. Surrender it and we will spare your colony." Marla rolled her eyes because of course it was that simple. "See, the thing is, we've grown kind of attached to it. Call it a pet rock if you will." There was a pause, and Marla imagined the Nyxarian's three eyes narrowing in frustration. "Your refusal is ill-advised." "Well, aren't you a ray of sunshine?" Marla retorted. "Look, pal, I'm not big on ultimatums and I'm even less fond of threats, so why don't we chat like civilized folks?" A long, ominous silence followed. It was the kind of dramatic pause that usually preceded gunfire in a cheap holo-vid. Finally, the Nyxarian responded with a chilling calmness. "You have one Ior to decide. After that, we will take what is Ior's." "Great, I'll pencil you in between drinking heavily and running for my life," Marla said, cutting the transmission with a sigh. With the clock ticking down faster than her patience, Marla gathered the crew, a ragtag mix of miners, engineers, and opportunists, all looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. But they were trained for this, improvising under pressure with nothing but wits and stubbornness. "All right, folks, here's the deal," Marla started, pacing the room like a caged lion. "We've got one Ior before those Nyxarians try to take our new toy. We need to make sure they leave empty-handed or in pieces." Dex stood by the display, showing a tactical layout of the colony. "We can set up the drones here, here, and here," he pointed, each spot a strategic advantage. "Turn this rock into something even those bastards have to respect." "Respect is overrated," Marla said. "But fear, that's something we can work with." As the crew began their preparations, the atmosphere turned from anxious to grimly determined. Jax, the eternal optimist, bounced around wiring explosives to drones like he was decorating a Christmas tree. "Think they'll appreciate our effort?" Jax asked, his voice light despite the tension. Marla snorted. "Oh, I'm sure they'll have a blast," Dex chuckled as he connected the last of the drones. "We might not have much, but what we do have is a lot of attitude and explosives. And that, my friend, is the best combination," Marla agreed, checking the readings on her tablet. "If they want this artifact, they are in for one hell of a fight." As the minutes ticked by, Marla felt a strange calm settle over her. There was something freeing about facing odds this laughably bad. After all, if you're going to be knee-deep in a cosmic mess, you might as well enjoy the view. "Everyone ready?" Marla asked, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd been through hell and back. The crew nodded, each person finding their place in the makeshift plan. Dex gave a thumbs up, Jax winked as if this were some grand adventure instead of a suicide mission, and the rest steeled themselves for the coming storm. "Here's to hoping these Nyxarians brought their dancing shoes," Marla said, activating the drones with a flourish that would make a magician proud. "Because we're about to give them one hell of a performance." With the stage set and the players in position, all that was left was to wait. The Nyxarians were punctual, as expected from a species that treated threats like social appointments. Their ships descended, sleek and predatory, bristling with weapons and the kind of confidence that came from having never met a human with nothing left to lose. "Marla," Colonel Darman's voice came in, strained and tense. "Don't do anything stupid." "Stupid's my middle name, Colonel," Marla replied. "But thanks for the concern." As the Nyxarian ship settled into attacking formation, Marla watched, her heart pounding a steady rhythm of defiance. The first shots rang out, powerful beams that scorched the asteroid's surface, a warning of the doom that waited just beyond. "Now!" Marla shouted, unleashing the drones in a chaotic symphony of metal and fire. They surged forward, a swarm of mechanical wasps defending their nest, and the battle began in earnest. The Nyxarians didn't expect the colony to bite back, and for a moment it looked like the element of surprise might actually work in their favor. Drones weaved through space, dodging and diving, explosions lighting up the sky like fireworks on a doomed Independence Day. Jax whooped, his youthful glee infectious despite the grim circumstances. "We're doing it, boss, we're holding them back." But Marla knew better than to celebrate too soon. Alien ships circled like vultures, probing for weaknesses, unwilling to give up their prize so easily. The artifact pulsed ominously behind them, a silent witness to the chaos it had wrought. "Keep it up," Marla urged, her fingers flying over the console, coordinating the drones like a conductor in a deadly orchestra. "Make them work for every inch." The minutes felt like hours, each decision a gamble, each move a desperate bid for survival. The Nyxarians pressed closer, their wrath evident in every attack, but the humans held the line, fueled by the stubborn will to live another day. As the battle raged on, Marla allowed herself a moment to wonder if this artifact was worth all the blood and sweat. But then again, what else was there to do in a universe that seemed hell-bent on proving its disdain for humanity? "It's not over yet, folks," Marla called, her voice a rallying cry among the chaos. "We've got one last trick up our sleeve." Dex grinned, activating the final trap, a series of hidden charges that would unleash a storm of debris and confusion upon their enemies. With a roar, the charges detonated, and the asteroid shuddered as if coming alive, sending rocks and metal hurtling into the Nyxarian fleet. It was a glorious mess, and for a moment the aliens faltered, their formation breaking apart under the onslaught. In the control room there was a collective moment of disbelief, then a cheer erupted, raw and triumphant. They'd done it, given the Nyxarians a fight they wouldn't soon forget. Marla let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "Well, that was fun," she said, sagging against the console with a weary smile. "Remind me to never do it again." Jax laughed, his eyes bright with relief. "You got it, boss, but admit it, you love this stuff," she chuckled, shaking her head. "Yeah, maybe a little, but don't tell anyone. I've got a reputation to maintain." As the dust settled and the Nyxarian ships retreated, licking their wounds, Marla turned to her crew, proud of the ragtag bunch that had somehow managed to hold their ground. "Nice work, everyone," she said, the adrenaline fading, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. Now, let's figure out what the hell we're gonna do about this artifact before they decide to come back. And with that, the crew of Zithos 9 returned to their battered outpost, ready to face whatever new madness the universe decided to throw their way. Because if there was one thing Marla Keene knew, it was that life out here was never dull, and she wouldn't have it any other way. The aftermath of the Nyxarian skirmish left the crew of Zithos 9 in a state of strange euphoria, the kind that follows narrowly avoiding death only to realize you're still knee-deep in a cosmic outhouse. Marla Keene, the poor bastard in charge, watched her ragtag team of miners and misfits as they patched up dents, both in the colony and their egos. "Well, aren't we the luckiest bunch of losers in the quadrant?" Marla muttered, mostly to herself. Life on Zithos 9 was a bit like playing chess with a drunken octopus, never a dull moment if you didn't mind the mess. Jax, ever the optimist, was bouncing around like a caffeinated squirrel, distributing a pathetic excuse for rations. "Hey, look on the bright side, Marla. If we make it out of this alive, we're gonna have the best story in the galaxy." "Yeah, right," Marla snorted, eyeing her assistant. "Provided the Nyxarians don't turn us into interstellar confetti first." Meanwhile, Dex Harwood, the colony's resident miner and professional cynic, was busy coaxing the rogue mining drones back into a semblance of order. "You know, Marla," he said, wiping his hands on his dusty overalls, "I used to think working underground was as bad as it got, but now we've got space squids with laser pointers." "Go figure. And they say I'm the pessimist," Colonel Darman chimed in, his voice cutting through the comms as sharp as his jawline. The whole military shtick might have been more convincing if he wasn't perpetually nursing a hangover. "Listen, Marla, those Nyxarians are nothing if not persistent. They'll be back." Marla sighed, as if she hadn't had enough doom and gloom predictions for one lifetime. "Don't worry, Colonel. We've got enough surprises to keep those slimy bastards busy. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got to figure out what the hell that artifact does before they come knocking again." As Marla headed to the artifact lab, a small corner of the colony that had definitely seen better days, she couldn't help but notice the cracks forming among her team. Miners, engineers, and opportunists, all with nerves shot to hell, were bickering over nothing and everything. It was like watching a reality show, if reality shows involved certain death and no promise of prize money. "Okay, listen up," Marla barked, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Save the drama for later. Right now we've got bigger fish to fry. And by fish, I mean those extraterrestrial assholes outside." The crew grumbled but obeyed, each returning to their assigned hellhole with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for dental surgery. Inside the lab, the artifact sat in all its mysterious glory, pulsing with a light that would have been pretty if it didn't scream possible death trap. Marla approached it with a mix of curiosity and dread, like a cat eyeing a particularly suspicious ball of yarn. "Right, you shiny bastard," she muttered, glaring at the artifact. "What's your secret?" As she fiddled with the controls, a sudden hum filled the room, a sound that somehow resonated within her bones, leaving her slightly nauseous but otherwise unharmed. It was a disconcerting sensation, like drinking 3 cups of coffee before breakfast. Marla raised an eyebrow, her brain doing mental somersaults. "Well, that's odd." She called Jax over, who was as enthusiastic as ever, despite the distinct possibility that touching an alien artifact could be the last thing he did. "What's up, boss? Feel anything weird?" Marla asked, watching him closely. Jax shrugged, the picture of innocence. "Just the usual existential dread." "Why?" Marla smiled despite herself. "Because that thing just tried to play a tune on my bones, and I'm starting to get a feeling we've got something those Nyxarians want real bad." Jax's grin widened. "Maybe we're immune to whatever alien mumbo-jumbo they're packing." "Maybe," Marla conceded, though she wasn't about to broadcast that tidbit to the crew just yet. It was the kind of ace you kept up your sleeve until the stakes were life and death, which, given their situation, was pretty much every day. Just then, Colonel Darman's voice crackled over the comms again, like a bad penny that just wouldn't disappear. "Marla, Nyxarians are ramping up. Looks like they're bringing out the big guns." Marla groaned, because of course they were. Is there a day these guys aren't in the mood for cosmic harassment? As Jax returned to the others, Marla felt the weight of command settle on her shoulders like a particularly unflattering lead cape. The Nyxarians, a species as charming as a wet sock, were deploying advanced weapons, the kind that could turn their quaint little colony into a crater with a view. Marla watched the radar, each blip representing a potential funeral service. It was enough to make anyone reach for the emergency booze stash, which she did, because sometimes the only way to deal with alien threats was a shot of something stronger than optimism. "All right, crew," Marla called out over the intercom, her voice laced with the determination of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Looks like our friendly neighborhood Nyxarians are upping their game. But we're not giving up this rock without a fight." The response was a mix of grunts and resigned acceptance, the kind that comes from knowing you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, with the rock being Zithos 9 and the hard place being the vacuum of space. The Nyxarians were nothing if not persistent, their advanced weapons soon making themselves known with a series of low-frequency pulses that reverberated through the colony. The sensation was akin to standing too close to a giant bass speaker, except instead of music, it was death metal performed by a tone-deaf dinosaur. Marla, however, noticed something curious. While the equipment around her was reacting like it was caught in a hurricane, she and the rest of the crew seemed fine. Uncomfortably fine considering the circumstances. "Jax, get in here," Marla called, watching the chaos unfold through the observation window. Jax strolled in, unfazed by the cacophony. "What's up, boss?" "Enjoying the show. Notice anything weird?" Marla asked, gesturing to the commotion outside. Jax scratched his head, a picture of innocence amidst the storm. "Aside from the obvious, you mean?" Marla nodded. "This weapon they're using, it's not affecting us. Not like it should." "Guess we're just lucky," Jax remarked with a grin, though Marla knew luck had about as much to do with it as a fish did with a bicycle. She turned back to the task at hand, her mind racing. If the Nyxarians knew about their immunity, they'd likely change tactics, and Marla wasn't about to give them the upper hand willingly. "Keep this to yourself for now," she advised Jax, her tone serious. "We'll use it when the time's right." With a nod, Jax left to relay orders to the rest of the crew, leaving Marla to ponder their next move. She glanced at the artifact, its glow a reminder of the peculiar advantage they held. It was a secret weapon of sorts, albeit one that came with more questions than answers. Outside, tensions flared as the Nyxarians continued their assault, each pulse a reminder of the precariousness of their situation. The colony's defenses were being tested, and the cracks among the crew were showing as tempers frayed like old rope. Dex, ever the realist, was trying to keep the peace among the miners who were increasingly on edge. "Look, we've been through worse," he argued, though the conviction in his words was about as solid as a paper-mache rock. One of the miners, a burly fellow with a permanent scowl, wasn't having it. "Worse than aliens turning us into toast." "Yeah, right," he spat, his voice thick with disdain. Dex sighed, the kind of deep, resigned exhalation that suggested this wasn't his first rodeo. "You want to go out there and negotiate with them. Be my guest." It was a testament to human stubbornness, an argument in the face of annihilation, like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. But that was humanity for you, irreverent, flawed, and never quite knowing when to give up. In the control room, Marla was reviewing their options, or lack thereof. The radar pinged with new activity, the Nyxarians regrouping for another round. It was a dance she'd grown all too familiar with, and each step was a reminder of the thin line between survival and oblivion. "Colonel, what's your take?" Marla asked, her voice weary but resolute. Darman's reply was as straightforward as a punch in the gut. "We need to hit them where it hurts, Marla. Use that artifact, whatever it does, because we're running out of time. Marla nodded, though the decision weighed on her like a bad hangover. She knew the risks of using an unknown alien artifact, the kind that could potentially end the world or save it. But desperate times called for desperate measures, and they were well past the point of no return. As the crew prepared for the next wave, Marla felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. It was the kind of serenity that came from knowing you were about to do something stupidly brave, the sort of thing that might just make a difference. "Okay, team," Marla addressed her ragtag bunch, each face a testament to human resilience or stubbornness. "We've got one shot at this, so let's make it count." And with that, the stage was set for another showdown, a battle against odds that seemed insurmountable, but with the faint glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd come out on top. Because if there was one thing Marla Keene knew, it was that in the grand scheme of the universe, sometimes it paid to be the underdog. Zithos 9 had officially become the galaxy's least attractive vacation spot. The Nyxarians had started their blockade like an overzealous mall cop, cutting off supplies and communication. It was as if someone decided to throw up a neon sign that read, "Welcome to the universe's least reliable postal service." Inside the colony, the miners were starting to resemble a pack of grizzled cats, all claws and fur standing on end. Food was dwindling, tempers were shorter than a space slug's memory, and Marla Keene had the unenviable task of trying to keep everyone from tearing each other's throats out. Colonel Darman, nursing what had to be one of his top 10 hangovers, stared at the radar screen like it had personally offended him. "We're in a right mess, Marla. If the Nyxarians keep this up, we'll be eating each other before week's end." Marla rolled her eyes, feeling the weight of leadership pressing down on her shoulders like a bench-pressing elephant. "I didn't sign up for cannibal's buffet, Darman. We need to think." Dex Harwood, who had perfected the art of looking busy while doing absolutely nothing, leaned against a nearby console, his expression a blend of boredom and mild curiosity. "Well, we could always try asking the Nyxarians nicely. Maybe they'll leave us a care package," Marla snorted. "Sure, because intergalactic warlords are known for their generosity." "Maybe we'll get a fruit basket and some cheese," Jax, the eternal optimist, chimed in. "I'm pretty sure they're lactose intolerant." "Great. We'll add that to our list of utterly useless intel," Marla retorted, massaging her temples as if it would somehow massage the problem away. She turned her attention back to the artifact, the alien piece of tech that had more secrets than a politician's diary. It sat there, inscrutable and quietly humming, and if Marla hadn't known better, she'd swear it was judging her. "All right, here's the plan," Marla declared, drawing the attention of the crew like a moth to a very sarcastic flame. "We're going to reverse engineer this shiny piece of alien crap. If we can figure out how to use their own tech against them, we might just scrape through this mess." Dex raised an eyebrow. "Reverse engineering alien tech with no instructions. Sounds like a Saturday night." Marla grinned despite the circumstances. "Exactly. But if we pull it off, it'll be a Saturday night to remember." They got to work. The lab transformed into a hub of frantic activity and whispered curses. The artifact, which had become the unofficial mascot of their ragtag team, was probed and prodded with the sort of caution usually reserved for handling radioactive snakes. Jax, who seemed to have a knack for guessing, fiddled with one of the panels. "I think this might be a control interface, or it could be a self-destruct button." "Who's willing to bet? Not the kind of gamble I'm interested in," Dex muttered, peering over Jax's shoulder like a disapproving parent. "You trigger that, and we could all be wearing our asses for hats." Marla watched the two bicker with a sense of strange comfort. At least they hadn't tried to kill each other yet, which was about as much success as she could hope for. Time ticked by, the tension in the colony rising like a bad smell. The miners were restless, the engineers frustrated, and the Nyxarians persistent in their cosmic harassment. It was like being trapped in a soap opera, minus the melodrama and with a lot more laser fire. Okay, let's see if we can't make this thing sing, Marla said, pushing a few buttons and hoping for the best. A soft whirring sound filled the air, followed by a series of lights flashing in a pattern that might have been helpful if anyone had a clue what they meant. Feeling lucky? Jax asked, his grin as bright and irritating as ever. Marla shrugged. Luck's just probability disguised as a lottery ticket. But sure, why not? As they continued to work, the Nyxarians upped the ante, their blockade squeezing the life out of the colony like a particularly aggressive boa constrictor. Supplies were dwindling, and with communications down, they were left in the dark, both literally and figuratively. Morale's lower than a worm's belly, Dex remarked, watching as a group of miners argued over the last can of synthetic beans. Got any speeches up your sleeve, Marla? Preferably one that doesn't involve us dying in spectacularly horrible ways. Motivational speaking was never my strong point, Marla admitted, though she knew something had to be done. The crew was looking to her for guidance, and she couldn't afford to let them down. She gathered everyone in the main hall, where a collection of mismatched chairs and makeshift benches served as an impromptu meeting area. The room was filled with the kind of silence that comes just before a brawl breaks out. "Listen up," Marla began, her voice steady despite the chaos brewing outside. "I know things look bleak. The Nyxarians have us boxed in and we're running on fumes. But we've been through worse." One of the miners, a stocky fellow with a face that looked like it had argued with a meat grinder and lost, snorted. "Name one time." "Well, remember when those drills went haywire and we nearly turned the colony into a Swiss cheese imitation? We survived that," Marla pointed out, earning a few nods of reluctant agreement. "And when that rogue mining drone decided to tango with the uranium deposit," Jax chimed in, ever the optimist. "We're still here, aren't we?" The crew grumbled but seemed to find some comfort in the fact that they'd overcome impossible odds before. It was a small victory, but in a situation like this, small victories were gold. Marla continued, "We're working on something that might just give us an edge. It's risky, but if it works, we'll have a fighting chance. What if it doesn't work?" Someone asked, their voice barely more than a whisper. Marla didn't hesitate. "Then we'll improvise, adapt, and swear loudly at the universe until something gives." The answer earned a few chuckles, the sound like music to her ears. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep them going a little while longer. Back at the lab, Dex was fiddling with a series of wires that looked more like spaghetti than anything else. "Think this'll really work?" he asked Marla, who was busy trying to decipher a particularly stubborn piece of alien glyphs. "We'll find out soon enough," Marla replied, though a kernel of doubt remained lodged in her mind like particularly stubborn popcorn. Jax, who was rooting around in a box of spare parts, emerged with something that looked suspiciously like a children's toy. "Hey, maybe this'll help," he said, offering it up like a prize. Dex eyed it skeptically. "Unless it's a Nyxarian pacifier, I doubt it." "Hey, you never know," Jax replied with a shrug, tossing it back into the pile. Maybe they just need a nap. The minutes dragged on, each tick of the clock bringing them closer to a confrontation none of them were quite prepared for. But Marla knew the importance of keeping busy, of moving forward even when it felt like the universe was conspiring to keep them pinned down. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of trial and error, the artifact came to life with a hum that filled the room. Lights danced across its surface in a pattern that was either a signal or an elaborate alien prank. "Did we do it?" Dex asked, his voice a mix of hope and incredulity. Marla nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure herself. "I think so. Now we just need to figure out what it does." Jax, ever the optimist, clapped his hands together. "Great. Now we just need to point it at the Nyxarians and hope it doesn't turn us into space dust." "Comforting," Dex muttered, though he couldn't hide the glint of curiosity in his eyes. As they prepared to test their newly acquired tech, Marla couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing at the edge of a precipice, the abyss yawning before them. But if they were going to go down, they'd do it on their own terms, with a middle finger raised high and a sarcastic quip on their lips. "All right, crew," Marla called out, her voice steady and sure. "Let's show those Nyxarian bastards what happens when you mess with the wrong rock." And with that, they braced themselves for the fight of their lives, armed with nothing more than guts, gallows humor, and a healthy dose of reckless optimism. Because on Zithos 9, that was just another day at the office. The radio crackled with static, a low, grumbling noise that matched Colonel Darman's mood perfectly. His hangover had graduated to a full-blown symphony of misery, and the impending Nyxarian assault wasn't helping his disposition. He squinted at the radar screen, the Nyxarian ships like malignant stars creeping closer, intent on showing them what real cosmic harassment looked like. "So this is our reward for holding out," Darman muttered, his voice rough as gravel. Getting served up on a silver platter, Marla Keene stood next to him, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the chaotic mess they dared to call a defense system. "I prefer my platters gold-plated, but I guess beggars can't be choosers. Optimism's in short supply, isn't it?" Darman grumbled, massaging his temples. "We're about 10 minutes from being overrun, and we're still fighting over how to get the coffee machine working," Marla snorted. "Yeah, survival hinges on caffeine intake." Who knew? There was a crash from behind them as Dex Harwood attempted to stand from his console, but instead performed a graceful ballet with a stray cable, ending in a less-than-graceful thud. He gave them a thumbs-up from the floor, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity. "Graceful as ever, Captain," Marla noted. Dex groaned, managing to get on his feet with all the grace of a drunken giraffe. "I was multitasking." "Too much at once, you know." "Ah, yes. The classic art of doing nothing while pretending to do everything," Marla quipped, grinning at him. "You're a master." Jax joined them, lugging a toolkit that looked like it contained everything but the kitchen sink. "That, or it was a very complex set of Tupperware. Got everything we need to patch up the defenses," he announced, sounding far more confident than the situation warranted. "Or at least make them slightly less terrible. Good to see you're keeping expectations sky high," Marla replied, her eyes shifting to the incoming threat on the radar. "What's the estimate, Darman?" "3 minutes until they start sending their goodwill gifts," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "And by that, I mean plasma bolts." "Charming," Marla muttered. "Guess we're gonna have to throw the party early." The colony was abuzz with tension, the sort that made your skin feel like it was 2 sizes too small. Miners and technicians darted around like headless chickens, desperately trying to shore up the defenses with whatever they could find. The Nyxarians didn't leave much room for optimism. "Everyone knows their roles," Marla called out, her voice cutting through the chaos like a well-aimed laser. The nods she received were half-hearted at best, but it would have to do. "Remember, it's not about how hard we hit, but how hard we can hit back. And if we hit the wrong button," Jax asked, his grin unfazed by the dire circumstances. "Then it's been nice knowing you," Marla shot back, smirking despite herself. The Nyxarians did not disappoint. The first barrage came in on schedule, lighting up the sky with a dazzling display of destruction. Plasma bolts ripped through the air, the colony's haphazard shields holding up with all the resilience of wet tissue paper. Dex was at the controls, frantically trying to reroute power to the failing defenses. "Why do they always aim for the plumbing?" he complained, as if the Nyxarians had a personal vendetta against their sewage system. "Maybe they just don't like us," Jax suggested, ducking as a panel exploded overhead. "Can't imagine why," Marla muttered, sweat prickling on her brow as she worked to stabilize the power grid. "We're such likable folks." The situation was spiraling faster than a cheap toilet flush at this point. With every passing second, the Nyxarian onslaught grew more relentless, their ships circling above like vultures over a particularly juicy carcass. "Darman, how's it looking topside?" Marla barked, her fingers flying over the controls. "Like we're about to get squashed into cosmic jam," Darman replied, wincing as the radar showed another wave incoming. In the chaos, A sudden shout of pain cut through the command room like a hot knife. Marla's head snapped around in time to see Dex clutching his arm, blood oozing through his fingers. "Damn it, Dex!" Marla rushed over, hauling him to his feet and dragging him behind a nearby console. "You trying to audition for Deadliest Injuries?" Dex managed a weak grin, his face pale. "Figured we needed some drama, stay there. We'll need you when this mess is over," Marla ordered, ignoring the pang of worry twisting in her gut. She couldn't afford to let emotions get the better of her, not now. The Nyxarian assault showed no signs of waning. If anything, they seemed delighted by the resistance, like a cat toying with a particularly defiant mouse. The crew was stretched thin, every able-bodied person pitching in to keep the colony from collapsing under the pressure. Marla, the main power coupler's about to blow. Jax's voice came through the comm, tinged with a faint sheen of panic. "Can you fix it?" Marla demanded, her mind racing through the options. "Sure, if you give me a couple of years and a miracle." Jax shot back, his voice crackling with static. "Well, we're a little short on miracles right now. Improvise, easier said than done." The colony was in its death throes and they all knew it. Each breath hung heavy in the air, the weight of defeat pressing down on their shoulders like a leaden cloak. Marla rallied the remaining miners, their faces set with grim determination. They were battered and bruised, but the fire of defiance still burned bright in their eyes. She drew in a breath, steeling herself for the final push. "This isn't the time to roll over and die," she declared, her voice carrying over the din. "We're not about to let those scaly bastards dictate how this ends, and if they do—" Someone muttered, doubt creeping in like an uninvited guest. "Then we give them hell," Marla replied, eyes blazing with a fierce intensity that left no room for argument. They held the line as best they could, their defenses creaking under the strain. It was a losing battle, and yet they fought on, driven by the stubborn refusal to accept defeat. "Ready for round two?" Jax panted, appearing beside Marla with a toolbox that had seen better days. "More like round 20, Marla grumbled, swiping a hand across her brow. "But who's counting? Got any sage advice for this one?" Jax asked, his eyes scanning the battlefield as if expecting a miracle to drop out of the sky. "Yeah. Don't die," Marla quipped, her lips curling into a wry smile. The Nyxarians were closing in. If they didn't make a breakthrough soon, there wouldn't be anything left to save. Marla's mind raced, desperate for something, anything that could tip the scales in their favor. The artifact. The thought came to her like a bolt of lightning, electrifying her senses. They'd barely scratched the surface of its potential, but what choice did they have? It was a gamble, but in their situation, a gamble was better than certain defeat. "We've got one shot at this," she announced, drawing the attention of those around her. "We need to activate the artifact. It's our only hope." "Sounds like a plan straight out of a bad adventure novel," Darman commented, his tone a curious blend of skepticism and intrigue. "Got a better idea?" Marla challenged, raising an eyebrow. "Not unless you count praying to every god in the galaxy," he admitted, shaking his head. "But I like your idea better." Jax was already moving, his nimble fingers flying over the controls as he prepared the artifact for activation. It was a long shot, but desperation was the mother of invention, and Zithos 9 was nothing if not desperate. "Okay, this is either going to save us or blow us all to hell," Jax said, his voice laced with a peculiar mix of excitement and dread. "Well, I've got a preference," Marla replied, watching as the artifact pulsed with light, its surface glowing with an otherworldly energy. "Ready?" Jax asked, his hand hovering over the activation switch. "Always," Marla answered, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. The artifact flared to life, a brilliant beacon in the gloom. Energy surged through the colony, the air crackling with power as the device hummed with an intensity that shook them to their cores. For a heartbeat, everything seemed to pause, the world teetering on the brink of oblivion. And then, with a burst of light, the artifact unleashed its fury, sending a shockwave rippling through the Nyxarian fleet, their ships scattering like leaves in a storm. The assault wavered, the attackers caught off guard by the unexpected counterattack. In the chaos, Marla felt a flicker of hope, a tiny ember amidst the darkness threatening to swallow them whole. "Did we do it?" Dex asked, his voice weak but full of wonder. Marla watched as the Nyxarians regrouped, their ships pulling back in confusion. It wasn't a victory, but it was enough to buy them time, and sometimes time was all you needed. "Not yet," she replied, determination hardening her resolve. "But we've got a fighting chance, and that's more than we had a minute ago." The colony was battered and bruised, but as the dust settled, Marla knew this was their darkest hour. Yet even in the abyss they found the strength to stand together, united in defiance against those who sought to crush them. Round 21. Jax asked, his grin infectious. "Bring it on," Marla replied, her heart filled with a fierce pride for those who stood with her. Because on Zithos 9, defeat wasn't an option. They'd fight on, not because it was easy, but because it was the only thing left worth doing. And if they were going to face the end, they'd do it on their own terms, with grit, humor, and a defiant middle finger raised to the stars. Zithos 9, a place where dreams came to die, assuming anyone was dumb enough to dream in the first place. The Nyxarian blockade had ensured that luxury items like hope and optimism were rarer than functioning mining drones. But here we were, with plasma bolts lighting up the sky like some twisted firework display. It was almost festive if you squinted hard enough and ignored the impending doom. Marla stood in the control room, her mind spinning faster than the planet's orbit. The artifact sat quietly, pulsing with an energy that no one really understood. It was like that one awkward relative at family gatherings. Everyone knew it was important somehow, but nobody could figure out what to do with it. Jax was fiddling with the artifact, his expression a cocktail of bewilderment and determination. "You sure this thing isn't going to blow us to bits?" he asked, glancing at Marla. "Think of it as a high-stakes science project," Marla replied, her voice dry as the Zithos desserts. "We might not win any awards, but we could end up in the history books, so no pressure then," Jax muttered, continuing his work with a focus that bordered on manic. Colonel Darman paced nearby, looking like a man whose hangover had taken a personal interest in his suffering. "What do we know about this damn thing?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. "As far as we can tell, it's a power source, not a weapon," Marla said, eyes fixed on the artifact. "Explains why it didn't turn the Nyxarians into space dust, so we're sitting on a cosmic battery and we didn't notice." Darman shook his head, chuckling darkly. "Figures." Marla was piecing it together, her mind racing. The Nyxarians had underestimated one thing: human ingenuity mixed with a healthy dose of desperation. If she could harness the artifact's energy, they might just have a fighting chance. And if not, well, at least they'd go out with a bang instead of a whimper. "Jax, can you reroute the artifact's power into the colonist systems?" Marla asked, her voice sharper than the edge of a broken dreams. "Already on it," Jax said, his fingers a blur over the controls. "But if this goes south, don't bother writing 'I told you so' on my tombstone. Wouldn't dream of it," Marla smirked, her mind focused on the Hail Mary they were about to attempt. "I'd put something like 'Here lies the optimistic idiot.' The Nyxarians weren't going to wait for them to figure it out." Another barrage rocked the colony, the impact making the ground shudder like it was laughing at their pathetic attempts to survive. "Time's up, people," Dex shouted, his arm hastily bandaged but his spirit unbroken. He was clutching the console as if it could somehow offer comfort. "Just a few more minutes," Jax said, his voice tinged with a frantic edge. "If this works, we might just give those scaly bastards a taste of their own medicine." "Better be one hell of a taste," Marla said, watching as the miners and technicians braced themselves for the next round. It was like watching ants prepare for a storm, scrambling to save what little they could. "Marla, we're ready to reroute the power," Jax announced, his voice crackling with the static of possibility. "Then do it," Marla said, her heart pounding in time with the artifact's pulse. and pray to whatever God's listening that we don't fry ourselves in the process. Considering how today's gone, I wouldn't count on divine intervention, Darman grumbled, his eyes locked on the radar as if trying to will it to show them something good for a change. The artifact hummed louder, its glow intensifying until it was like staring into the sun. The air felt charged, buzzing with an energy that made the hairs on their arms stand on end. And then, it happened. The artifact's power surged through the colony, the flickering lights stabilizing as energy coursed through every wire and circuit. The defenses roared to life, stronger than ever before, glowing with the unearthly light of the artifact's energy. "Holy shit, it's working!" Dex shouted, disbelief mixed with elation. The Nyxarian ships hesitated, as if sensing the sudden shift in balance. Their blockade was no longer the impenetrable wall they'd assumed it to be. "Let's see how they like a taste of their own medicine," Marla said, a fierce grin spreading across her face. "Firing defenses," Jax announced, his fingers dancing over the controls like a concert pianist on a sugar rush. The colony's defenses unleashed a torrent of energy, amplified by the artifact's power. Beams of light lanced through the air, cutting through the Nyxarian ships like a hot knife through butter. The tables had turned and the hunters were now the hunted. "Never thought I'd see the day," Darman said, his voice tinged with something that might have been respect. "Keep the pressure on them," Marla shouted, her voice a rallying cry amidst the chaos. "We're not out of the woods yet." The Nyxarians regrouped, their formations tightening as they adapted to the new threat. But it wasn't enough. They'd underestimated their prey, and now they were paying the price for their arrogance. "Jax, maintain the power flow," Marla ordered, her eyes locked on the battlefield. "We can't afford to let up." "Already on it, boss," Jax replied, his expression one of grim determination. It was the look of a man who knew he'd just pulled off the impossible but wasn't about to start celebrating yet. The battle raged on, each side giving as good as it got. But with the artifact's power fueling their defenses, the colony was holding its own. For the first time in what felt like forever, they had the upper hand. "Looks like the Nyxarians are on the back foot," Dex observed, his tone a mix of disbelief and hope. "Let's not start singing victory songs just yet," Marla cautioned, though she couldn't help but feel a surge of pride at what they'd accomplished. As if sensing their defiance, the Nyxarian ships began to withdraw, their formations breaking apart like a flock of startled birds. It was the first sign of retreat they'd shown, and Marla intended to make sure it wasn't the last. "This isn't over," Darman warned, his gaze hard. "They'll be back and they'll be pissed." "Let them come," Marla said, her voice laced with defiance. "We'll be ready." The artifact's power had given them a reprieve, a chance to regroup and strengthen their defenses. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was hope, a fleeting, fragile thing that was nonetheless real. The colony was a mess, but it was alive, and that was more than Marla had dared to hope for when the day began. They'd faced annihilation and come out swinging, and as she looked around at the grimy, determined faces of her crew, Marla felt a fierce pride burn in her chest. "Round 21, anyone?" Jax asked, his grin infectious despite the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "Bring it on," Marla replied, her heart pounding with the thrill of battle. In the depths of space, the war wasn't over. But for the first time, it felt like they had a fighting chance. Zithos 9 had been a place of despair, a barren rock caught in the vise grip of a merciless enemy. But today, they'd turned the tide. Today, they'd shown the galaxy that humanity wasn't about to roll over and die just because some scaly invaders decided to crash the party. Today, they'd made a stand, and damn it, they'd do it again if they had to. Because on this forgotten rock in the middle of nowhere, they were more than just survivors. They were fighters, and they weren't about to back down. "Marla," Dex said, his voice cutting through her thoughts. "What's next?" Marla looked at her crew, battered but unbroken, and knew the answer. "We keep fighting," she said, her voice steely with resolve. "Until the stars burn out if we have to." The colony echoed with their cheers, a defiant sound that sent chills down Marla's spine. They were alive, and as long as they were alive, they'd keep fighting. Because on Zithos 9, defeat wasn't an option. They'd face whatever came next with grit, humor, and a middle finger raised to the cosmos. And maybe, just maybe, they'd come out of it alive. Aboard the creaky metal husk that was the control room, Marla Keene stood amidst the chaos like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of misfits. She glanced at Jax, who was deep in communion with the artifact, looking like a man trying to solve a particularly fiendish crossword puzzle. "Jax, any chance that thing is our golden ticket out of this mess?" Jax shot her a look that was as dry as the air in a Nyxarian sauna. "If by golden ticket you mean a chance to get us fried to a crisp, then sure, it's our ride to the Wonka factory." Colonel Darman, who had managed to find a spot on the console that didn't look sticky, grumbled something about fate and other unsavory concepts. "Let's just hope your luck holds, Jax, cause if it doesn't, I'm blaming you in my next life." With the Nyxarian ships looming like space vultures, Marla knew they needed a miracle, or, at the very least, a half-decent plan. "All right, folks, let's make sure those scaly bastards remember the day they messed with Zithos 9. Dex Harwood, the captain with 2 left feet and a heart of mostly golden intentions, piped up. "I've got eyes on the Nyxarian leaders. They're probably gloating over their inevitable victory as we speak." "Well, let's wipe those smug smiles off their scaly mugs," Marla said, feeling a grim satisfaction at the thought. "Jax, can we redirect the artifact's energy to scramble their systems? Maybe give them a taste of their own medicine." Jax's fingers moved like they had a mind of their own, the controls a blur under his rapid touch. "I'll see what I can do, but if they have firewalls, we're talking fortresses, not fences." Marla nodded, knowing full well they were in uncharted waters without so much as a life raft. If there's one thing humanity excels at, it's breaking what should be unbreakable. The colony shuddered under another barrage, the kind that rattled teeth and nerves alike. The Nyxarians weren't letting up, but neither were they. Marla leaned closer to the console, her voice a low rumble over the chaos. "Let's give them a show." Dex, forever the optimist even in a scrapyard of despair, chimed in. "Here's to hoping this is the part where we pull a rabbit out of the hat." "More like a whole damn circus," Marla replied, her grin one of fierce determination. Jax's fingers paused briefly, as if taking a moment to consider the ramifications of what he was about to do. "All right, I'm rerouting the power now. If this doesn't work, we'll just be a footnote in some alien history book about how not to handle human pests." The colony's defenses crackled to life with a renewed vigor, their systems humming a tune of discordant defiance. It was a sound Marla had come to recognize as humanity's stubborn refusal to die quietly. As the artifact's energy spread through the systems, Marla could practically feel the balance shifting. The Nyxarian ships staggered, their formations breaking like a bad dance troupe. "Looks like we hit a nerve," she observed, satisfaction flooding her voice. "Do they have nerves, or just a collective superiority complex?" Jax wondered aloud, his gaze fixed on the readouts. "Either way, we're about to give them a lesson in humility," Darman said, a hint of a smile breaking through his usual gruff demeanor. With a renewed wave of energy, the defenses lashed out, beams of concentrated power slicing through the void and the Nyxarian blockade. It was a chaotic ballet of light and destruction, and Marla found herself laughing despite the madness surrounding them. "They're pulling back," Dex shouted, disbelief threading through his voice like a silken thread. "Don't let up," Marla ordered, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of battle. "Show them what happens when they push us too far." The colony's defenses continued their relentless assault, the artifact's energy a torrent that refused to be tamed. The Nyxarian ships faltered, their once impenetrable blockade crumbling under the onslaught. Jax adjusted the controls, his expression a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. "I think they're starting to get the message." "Good," Marla said, a fierce pride lighting up her eyes. "Now let's make sure it's one they'll never forget." The Nyxarian ships began to retreat in earnest, their formations disintegrating like a poorly constructed sandcastle meeting the tide. It was a sight that made Marla's heart surge with a hope she hadn't dared to entertain until now. "They are running," Dex confirmed, his voice filled with a disbelief that was rapidly turning into triumph. "Not fast enough," Marla replied, refusing to let their guard down. "Let's make sure they don't come back." As the last of the Nyxarian ships blinked out of sight, the control room erupted into cheers, a sound that reverberated through the colony with a contagious energy. Marla allowed herself a moment to breathe, her shoulders sagging with the weight of a battle hard fought and won. She looked around at her crew, at the faces that had been her constant companions through this hellish ordeal, and felt a surge of gratitude and camaraderie that warmed her in ways the artifact's energy couldn't. "Let's not get too comfortable," Darman warned, though his tone was less gruff than usual. "We might have won this round, but they'll be back," Marla nodded, her expression one of steely resolve. "And when they do, we'll be ready." The colony was still a mess, but it was a mess that was alive, and that was more than they dared hope for at the start of the day. They'd taken on the Nyxarians and emerged victorious, and while the war was far from over, they'd proven that humanity wasn't about to roll over and die. "Jax, how's the artifact holding up?" Marla asked, turning her attention back to the pulsating hunk of mystery that had been their unlikely savior. "Still glowing, still humming," Jax said, his tone tinged with awe. "I think it likes us." "Good," Marla replied, a wry smile on her lips, "because it's about to become our newest team member." Dex, ever the optimist with a penchant for gallows humor, chuckled. "Maybe we should name it something like Fred, you know, to make it feel welcome." Jax snorted, the tension of battle giving way to a lighter camaraderie. "Fred the Artifact. Yeah, that's got a nice ring to it." "All right, Fred," Marla said, addressing the artifact with a mock salute. "Let's see what else you can do." The control room, though battered and bruised, felt different now, charged with an energy of hope and defiance that hadn't been there before. It was as if the very walls had soaked in the will to survive, to fight, to overcome whatever the cosmos threw their way. "And if the Nyxarians come knocking again?" Dex asked, though there was no fear in his voice, only a readiness to face whatever lay ahead. "Then we'll answer with a door full of lead and a side of human ingenuity," Marla replied, her voice a rallying cry amidst the lingering echoes of battle. The crew laughed, a sound that was as much an act of defiance as it was a celebration. They'd faced annihilation and come out swinging, and as Marla looked around at the grimy, determined faces of her crew, she felt a fierce pride burn in her chest. "Round 22, anyone?" Jax asked, his grin infectious despite the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "Bring it on," Marla replied, her heart pounding with the thrill of battle and the promise of challenges yet to come. The universe might be vast and uncaring, but on this forgotten rock in the middle of nowhere, they were more than just survivors. They were fighters, and they weren't about to back down. Because on Zithos 9, defeat wasn't an option. They'd face whatever came next with grit, humor, and a middle finger raised to the cosmos. And maybe, just maybe, they'd come out of it alive. The celebrations on Zithos 9 were about as loud and chaotic as you'd expect from a bunch of miners who'd just given the universe's worst neighbors a solid drubbing. Drinks were flowing, questionable jokes filled the air, and a portable speaker belted out tunes from a century ago, as if nostalgia could somehow dilute the bitterness of hard-fought victory. Marla Keene found herself leaning against the control room's entrance, watching the revelry with a weary smile. "Look at them," she mused, gesturing towards the miners who now danced like they'd discovered a new mining vein of rare minerals. "Just a few hours ago, we were all potential space dust." Dex Harwood, who had somehow acquired a bottle of something that could strip paint, joined her, a grin plastered across his face. "Gotta hand it to him. They know how to party, even when the universe seems determined to kill us every day." Marla shrugged, the motion somehow managing to convey both amusement and exhaustion. "A day without existential threats is unbearable," Right. From across the room, Colonel Darman was engaged in an animated discussion with Jax about the artifact, now affectionately dubbed Fred. I'm just saying, Darman was insisting, if it starts singing show tunes, I'm out. Jax shook his head, a smirk tugging at the corners of his lips. Pretty sure it's more of a classic rock kind of entity, though I wouldn't put it past the thing to have some secrets tucked away. Secrets? Marla interjected, her curiosity piqued despite herself. You mean besides being our unexpected savior? Well, Jax began, tapping the console with a rhythm that was almost musical. Fred here, he gestured to the artifact, resting now in a cradle of wires and glowing softly as if basking in its own glory. Might just be the key to a little more than just keeping the Nyxarians at bay. Dex snorted. Like what? A universal remote to turn off the galaxy's worst TV channels. Think bigger, Jax replied, his eyes alight with the kind of excitement that usually preceded a very bad idea. What if we could actually use it to power this rock? Maybe even create a stable life support system that doesn't rely on the Nyxarians' whims. Marla couldn't help but laugh, though the sound was edged with disbelief. You're saying we could turn Zithos 9 into a self-sufficient colony with Fred? Why not? Jax shot back, his enthusiasm infectious. We've already done the impossible once today. Why stop there? Because apparently we're masochists, Darman muttered, though his scowl was softer than usual. Still, if Fred's got more tricks up its sleeve, I'm listening. So then, Marla said, looking at her motley crew, a group that had somehow become her family. Where do we start? We've got a rock, an ancient artifact, and a colony of miners who think fine dining means reheating yesterday's rations. Dex raised his bottle in a mock toast. I'd say we start by figuring out if Fred can do more than just hum menacingly. Jax nodded, already lost in thought, his mind a whirlwind of possibilities. If we can tap into even half of what I think it can do, we might be able to make Zithos 9 a place worth sticking around in. Of course, there's the small matter of the Nyxarians eventually coming back, Dex pointed out, his optimism tinged with the cynicism that had kept them all alive so far. Marla sighed, her gaze drifting to the darkened radar screen, a reminder of their continual struggle. Yeah, about that, we need to be ready. Next time they might not just send their lackeys. So, a party and a plan, Jax suggested, his grin wide. Sounds like a typical day on Zithos 9 to me. The celebration raged on into the night, or what passed for night on this barren chunk of rock. As the energy of victory began to wane, exhaustion crept in, and one by one, the miners faded into sleep, sprawled out across makeshift beds and whatever flat surfaces they could find. Marla stayed a while longer, her mind a whirlwind of strategies, contingencies, and dreams. Zithos 9 had been a stepping stone at best, a death trap at worst, but now, with Fred's mysterious potential, it could become something far more. She found herself laughing softly at the absurdity of it all, a woman who'd never wanted responsibility now contemplating the future of an entire colony. Dex, who was still nursing his bottle like it owed him money, caught her eye. You thinking what I'm thinking? If you're thinking we're biting off more than we can chew, then yeah, absolutely, Marla replied, a wry smile tugging at her lips. Just how I like it, Dex said, raising his bottle in salute. The next morning, or the closest approximation of morning that existed on a planet with such a sky, a bleary-eyed Marla convened her ragtag team. All right, people, let's see what Fred can do when he's not busy being our guardian angel. Jax, who looked like he'd slept about as much as a caffeine-addicted owl, was already fiddling with the console. First things first, we need to see just how much energy this thing can output without turning us into crispy critters. Colonel Darman, who'd somehow managed to maintain his perpetual grumpiness through the celebration, grunted his agreement. We'd better not blow up the colony trying to give it an upgrade. Dex clapped Jax on the shoulder, almost sending him sprawling. No pressure, right? Just the future of human existence and all. Jax managed a weak grin as he began his work. Fred, the enigmatic artifact, thrummed with a gentle rhythm, as if eager to reveal its secrets. Marla watched, her own anticipation mirrored in the eyes of those gathered. The weight of their collective hope and fear hung heavy in the air, a reminder of just how much they stood to gain or lose. Jax's fingers danced across the controls, his movements precise despite the slight tremor of exhaustion. "All right, let's see if we can get Fred to play nice with our systems." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a hum that resonated through the metal confines of the control room, Fred began to glow more intensely. The lights flickered, and the hum deepened into a low, reassuring thrum that seemed to pulse with life. "Looks like we're onto something," Jax announced, his voice tinged with excitement. The console lit up, displaying a series of readouts and graphs that meant little to anyone without a degree in theoretical physics. Jax, however, seemed to understand, and his grin widened. "We're pulling in more energy than we've ever had. This could actually work." "Define work," Darman said, crossing his arms. "Because I'd really prefer if work doesn't include spontaneous combustion." Jax waved a hand dismissively. "It's stable. We've got more power than the colony's ever seen. We might even have enough to expand beyond survival mode." Marla felt a thrill run through her, a sensation that was becoming increasingly familiar. Hope. It was a dangerous thing, but after what they'd been through, it was also addictive. "Okay," she said, her voice carrying a note of determination that hadn't been there before. "Let's see what we can do with this. If Fred wants to help us out, I say we let him." Dex, ever the optimist, clapped his hands together. "So what's first? Food replicators, a proper defense system, maybe a hot tub," Jax chuckled. "Let's start with stabilizing life support. Then we can talk about the essentials like hot tubs." And, Marla added, "we need to keep one eye on the radar. The Nyxarians might not be back right away, but they won't forget about us. Especially now that we've given them a reason to remember us," Darman said, his tone resigned yet somehow proud. They had their work cut out for them, but for the first time since arriving on Zithos 9, it felt like more than just survival. It felt like a chance to build something real, something lasting. As the hours turned into days, the crew worked tirelessly, driven by the dual specters of necessity and ambition. Fred's energy infused the colony with new life, powering systems long dormant, and opening up possibilities they hadn't dared to dream of. Water purification improved, food production surged, and the atmosphere generators cranked up to levels that made breathing more of a breeze and less of a chore. The miners, too, felt the shift. Less burdened by the constant threat of running out of air or food, their spirits rose. There was talk of expansion, of building beyond the cramped, makeshift quarters they'd called home for too long. Marla, Dex, Jax, and Darman met regularly, their discussions a mix of the practical and the fantastical. They debated the feasibility of everything from new defense mechanisms to establishing communication with neighboring colonies, if any existed. As Jax continued to delve into Fred's depths, he discovered more than just energy. "It's like an ancient computer," he explained one evening, excitement threading through the fatigue in his voice. "Fred's got knowledge stored in there. Maps, history, maybe even languages." "So, a box of alien secrets and energy," Dex commented, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Sounds like the start of a bad sci-fi movie." Marla shook her head, her smile one of genuine amusement. "Let's hope it's one with a good ending. We deserve a break." Their newfound success didn't erase the scars of the past, nor did it guarantee safety against future threats, but it gave them something precious: hope. And as Marla looked around at the faces of her team, she realized that even in the darkest corners of the universe, hope could be a powerful weapon. "Let's keep this momentum going," she urged, her voice strong and steady. "We've got a chance to do something extraordinary here, and I don't intend to waste it." With Fred's enigmatic power at their disposal and the determination that had seen them through countless battles, they faced the future with renewed vigor. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about thriving, about carving out a place in the universe where they could live on their terms. And as the stars wheeled above, indifferent as ever, the people of Zithos 9 stood defiant, ready to meet whatever came next with grit, humor, and an unwavering resolve to make their mark on the cosmos.